Now it's my pleasure to introduce the first speaker, Martin Hellman. He won the ACM AM Turing Award in 2015, together with Whit Diffie, for inventing and promulgating both asymmetric public key cryptography, including its applications to digital signatures, and a practical cryptographic key exchange method. His presentation will be today on the evolution of public key cryptography, and it's my pleasure to ask Martin to the rostrum. Depending on how much time is left, there will be a Q&A at the end, but we will see. If not, please take the chance of asking Martin during the fairly long coffee break. We have a coffee break of 1 hour that should give you a chance to talk to him directly. Martin?
Thank you, Andreas. Well, thank you all for being here today. My thanks to the staff of the HLF for pulling together this amazing conference, and of course to the memory of Klaus Tschirra for the vision of the Heidelberg Laureates Forum. And my wife and I have felt very, very welcome here. And also, I should recognize sitting in the front row, if you would stand up, Whit Diffie, my partner in crime. I asked Whit if he wanted to add anything to this, and he said he'll just stand up and heckle me if need be. No, he promised to behave himself. The goal of the talk is several-fold, partly to pull back the veil on how does something like public key cryptography get developed. I love that people see it as revolutionary, and please don't stop saying that. But by the end of the talk, I hope that you'll be asking, what took you guys so long? You know, why didn't you see it sooner? There are lots of road signs all pointing us in a certain direction. And another goal is to honor some of the others who contributed to the development of public key cryptography. There are always more people than can be honored in any award. And I had planned lots of time for questions, but I was advised that it's actually difficult in this environment, and so I've quickly added some additional material, and we'll see how that works. We may do questions, we may not. I'll surprise myself. So with that, let me go to the first slide. So is public key cryptography revolutionary or evolutionary? Well, the one sense, I mean, there are many ways you can see it as revolutionary, but in 1883, August Kirchhoff enunciated some very important rules for modern cryptography, and one of them was that the general system, the algorithm, must be assumed known to everyone. Even if you try to keep it secret, you need to assume in assessing its security that your adversaries have access to it, because they might steal it, they might learn it somehow. And all of the security should reside in the secrecy of the key. Well, as soon as you say that, how can you have a public key? It sounds like heresy, and it is. Of course, you have two keys. You have a secret key and a public key. But you can see where that creates a barrier. Well, let's look at how it's evolutionary, and I'll go into this in more detail. But half of the concept, public key distribution, occurred independently to three different groups about the same time. Whit and I were working at Stanford, and what we came up with was this concept of a public key cryptosystem, which includes digital signatures. That's the other half of it. A public key cryptosystem can also do public key distribution. It's a higher level in a sense. But Ralph Merkle, working at Berkeley as an undergraduate and then as a master's student with absolutely no support from any of the faculty there. In fact, you'll see some comments from a professor discouraging him in a minute, handwritten comments. Ralph came up with the idea of public key distribution on his own. And actually a little bit before Whit and myself, we've been able to determine. We worked independently. We didn't know about each other until after we'd each had come up with these ideas. James Ellis, Clifford Cox, and Malcolm Williamson at GCHQ, the British equivalent of NSA, came up, I should say, alleged to have come up with, because here's the problem. How do you know that a secret document put forth in 1995 or whatever year it was, claiming to come from 1973, really is from there? Of course, I don't think that is the case, and so I will say that they, in fact, did develop public key cryptography independently, And about the same time, a little before Whit and myself, but I'm not even sure before Ralph. I'd have to check that at GCHQ. Interestingly, though, they did not see digital signatures, or at least in all of the documents they put forth, there's nothing about digital signatures. So another way that it is, oh yeah, so this is a picture of Ralph on the left, myself with a beard. I had a beard back in those days, and longer hair, more hair. And Whit has just as much hair, and he still has the beard. I think it's gone a little bit from blonde to white. That's a picture of the three of us taken at Stanford. So let's look at another evolutionary aspect, which is a cryptographic hierarchy. One of the things Whit and I tried doing in our early work at Stanford was to come up with a almost like a taxonomy of cryptographic systems. And at the simplest cryptographic entity that we could see is a one-way function, a function that's easy to compute but hard to invert. And these were being used in Unix login, and there were papers on this, so one-way was not a new concept at all. Then there were conventional cryptosystems, and let's see, I'm trying to go, But the time up here is flashing. Okay. If you could do something so it doesn't flash, it would not distract me. A conventional crypto system, which of course also existed, was the next level, because you could always go from a conventional cryptographic system to a one-way function, but you couldn't necessarily go in the reverse direction. And so this is an old slide, because what's the cryptographic function being used? DES, the data encryption standard. Today it would be the advanced encryption standard. But if you put a fixed plaintext P0 in the plaintext port, you put X in the key port, and take Y as the ciphertext, that is a one-way function, because it's easy to encipher, but it's very hard to do cryptanalysis to determine X, the key, from just knowing the plaintext and ciphertext. So there's that step from one-way functions to conventional crypto systems. And then the next level that we saw is something that's not generally talked about, but it's a trapdoor crypto system. People sometimes use that word synonymously with public key crypto system, which is actually incorrect. And I'll describe a trapdoor system in just a minute. And then the next level up was a public key crypto system. So what is a trapdoor crypto system? It's a general's dream, or for that matter, NSA's dream, GCH's dream, GRU's dream. It's a system that, if you use it, is totally secure against your adversaries, but if your adversaries steal it and use it, you can break it very easily. There's trapdoor information, secret bit string that's used in the construction of the system that allows the designer to quickly break it, but no one else. And you see why a general would love this, because I want my soldiers, my troops, to be inviolate against you breaking their communications. But if you should capture one of our systems and use it, I want to be able to break what you say. And I think this may have occurred to us as we were thinking about the data encryption standard. Do you think that's where it came up with? Yeah. Yeah. So as we knew that the data encryption standard was about to be announced, we didn't know what it would be, and we saw that the government had this problem that they would like it to be secure against everyone else, but they'd like to be able to break it. Now, from a trapdoor crypto system to a public key exchange is a small step, at least if you can create trapdoor crypto systems at will. So let me pick, let's see. The fellow in the third row there on the edge, raise your hand with the hat. Yes, you. Okay, you and I, have we ever met before? No prearrangement. What I'm going to do is I'm going to exchange a key with him. And even though I'm telling him how we're doing it, I'm going to create a trapdoor crypto system, which under this hypothesis I can create at will. I then tell it to all of you. Okay, and so you hear it. What's your name, by the way? August? Oh, I kick off. Oh, but now we can exchange information secretly. Audas. Thank you. Okay, but now I have to go back there, and I haven't exchanged anything with him. Okay. So I create a trapdoor crypto system. I describe it to the entire audience, including you. You then create a random key that only you know. I don't know it. The audience doesn't know it. You then encrypt a message in that key, send it to me. Since it's a trapdoor crypto system that I designed, I can break it, but nobody else can. I get the key that he used, and we then use that in a conventional crypto system. So you can see that evolutionary step. Now, public key cryptography, Whit and I, working at Stanford about 1975, developed the concept of a public key crypto system. This is a system where you have a public key and a secret key that are inverses to one another. And ideally, and in the RSA system, for example, it happens, it doesn't matter whether you encrypt first and decrypt second or do it the other way around. They're inverse operations. And that's how you get digital signatures. You use your secret key to sign, and people use my public key to verify my signature, whereas if I want to get privacy, I use your public key to encrypt, and only you who know your secret key can decrypt. Ralph Merkle independently developed the concept of public key distribution, which we actually hadn't thought of in quite those terms. We realized you could do public key distribution with a public key crypto system, and in fact, that's how it is typically used because public key systems are slower than conventional systems. And they have certain other characteristics that make them better for key exchange than for actually sending information directly. And he had a proof of concept. It's Merkle's puzzle systems. And if you haven't read his paper in the CACM, I strongly recommend that you do. It's an overlooked paper. And the interesting thing is the algorithm that we came up with that we called alpha to the x1, x2, which is now called Diffie-Hellman key exchange, is actually a Merkle public key distribution system. And we'll get into that later. So to give you an idea of what Ralph was up against, this is from the fall of 1974, and you probably can't read that, but this is a project proposal for CS244 at Berkeley. Ralph is a master's student at this point, and what it says, let me read it. Project proposal, establishing secure communications between separate secure sites over insecure communication links. Assumptions, no prior arrangements have been made between the two sites, and it is assumed that any information known at either site is known to the enemy. The sites, however, are now secure, and any new information will not be divulged. Public key distribution. And can you see what the professor wrote at the top? Project 2, which was much more mundane, looks more reasonable, maybe because your description of Project 1 is muddled terribly. Talk to me about this. So Ralph dropped the course and went off and developed his system. Now, in the professor's defense, Ralph was a student and didn't know how to describe things as well as he now does. Let me turn to another contributor, John Gill. And actually, Manuel, are you in the audience? Manuel Blum? Yeah, he was one of your students, wasn't he? Yeah, at Berkeley, a PhD student, except he was in the math department, even though you were in CS. So John Gill is the new kid on the block. I became an assistant professor at Stanford in 1971, and John came in 1972, so I thought of him as the new guy. And he was a mathematician, whereas I was an electrical engineer. And so I went to John, I said, I'm looking for one-way functions, functions that are easy to compute but hard to invert, that have nice mathematical structure, in the hope that we might turn them into conventional cryptographic systems. And at this point, we didn't even have the public key concept. And John starts off, of course, with factorization. And I told John, I said, well, Whit and I have already thought about that. Unfortunately, we didn't take it far enough where we would have had RSA. We didn't see how to use integer factorization as a one-way function. And then he said a couple of other things. And then he said, what about indices? And I said, what are indices? Well, they're what we call discrete logarithms, but John's a mathematician, and so he called them indices. And, oh, I'd never heard of that one. And so the discrete exponential function, y equal alpha to the x mod q, see where right there, can be done very rapidly. For example, if you want alpha to the 9th power, it does not take 8 multiplications. It only takes 3 squarings, right? Alpha squared, squared, squared is alpha to the 8th. And each time you're reducing mod q so the numbers don't get big. And then you multiply that by alpha to the 1st to get alpha to the 9th. In the same way, if you want alpha to the 2 to the 1000th power, how many multiplications does that take? Just 1,000. You square 1,000 times. And if you want alpha to the 2 to the 1,000th plus 1, you then just multiply by alpha. And using the binary decomposition of the exponent, you can see it takes a very small number of multiplications. Like if you're using a 1,000-bit modulus, it takes at most 2,000 multiplications to do it. So exponentiation is very fast, but as far as we could see, and as far as we still can see, the discrete logarithm problem, unless quantum computers are developed, is very slow. There's no proof of that, by the way. That's art. And so starting with John's suggestion, oh, and by that's John in 1976. That's not John today. We've all changed. Beards, no beards, white hair instead of dark hair, less hair. So the first thing that we tried doing with the discrete exponential function, discrete logarithm function, indices, was to create a conventional cryptographic system, because Whit and I were hoping to prove that a system was secure, and trying to prove that DES is secure is impossible. It's so random, but of course it also makes it much harder to break because it's got so little structure to it. And so one night I was playing with these functions, and I was trying to see how you might make a conventional cryptographic system. And I realized, I said, okay, there are 3 variables, alpha, x, and y, right? And I thought of Q as public information, which, I mean, there are lots of permutations here as to what you assume is public. But I was dealing with alpha, x, and y as the variables. And I said, how could they possibly correspond to plain text, ciphertext, and key? Well, going from alpha and x to y is easy. That's exponentiation. Going from alpha and y to x is the discrete logarithm problem. That is believed to be hard. Going from x and y to alpha is easy. I won't describe how, but it is. And then I wrote down, going from the plain text and the key to the ciphertext is an encryption operation. That has to be easy. Going from the ciphertext and the key to the plain text is the decryption operation. That has to be easy. But going from the plain text and the ciphertext to the key is cryptanalysis. We want that to be hard. So let's see, easy, easy, hard. Oh, I'm sorry, on top it's easy, hard, easy. On the bottom it's easy, easy, hard. So if you're going to make an association, it's clear you put the 2 hards together. And so let's see, the key is the hard thing to compute, and x is the hard thing to compute. And you very quickly end up with the equations I'm going to show you on the next slide, along with a picture of Steve Pohlig. That's Steve over 40 years ago. And this is also a tribute to Steve. He died within about the last 6 months, early. I mean, he's older than the picture, but still, it was an early death, and he's missed by his family and by his colleagues. He was at Lincoln Laboratories for his whole career after Stanford. So the Pohlig-Hellman crypto system, if you haven't seen this, it's in, if you go to my Stanford webpage, there's a link to my publications, and almost all of them are available in PDF, including this one. The encryption operation is ciphertext equals plain text to the kth power mod Q, where Q is assumed public, known to everyone, or could be part of the key if you want. The deciphering operation is to raise the ciphertext to the dth power mod Q, because you see that gives you p to the kd mod Q. If you raise first to the k power and then to the d power, you get p to the kd power. So we want kd to equal 1 in the exponent. Well, it turns out when you're doing arithmetic mod Q, arithmetic in the exponent is done mod Q minus 1. So that's not hard to do. As long as k and d are relatively prime to Q minus 1, you can do that using Euclid's algorithm. And so, and by the way, that is known as phi of Q. There's a more general formula for phi of n when n is not a prime number. So that was the Pohlig-Hellman conventional crypto system. Now, those of you who know RSA, take a look at that. It looks very familiar. The only difference between this and RSA is to do the arithmetic mod n. And instead of calling it k, they call it e, the enciphering exponent, and instead they still call d, the deciphering exponent. We totally missed that. We had this, I think, 2 years before, maybe even more, before RSA, and I'd have to go back. I think the reason we may have missed it, aside from just not being smart enough, was that we may have come up with this system before we had the public key concept, so we may have not then thought of applying it. And so this is not to take away from the contribution of RSA. I mean, the fact that we walked all around it and missed it, if anything, gives them all the more credit for realizing it. So let me go to, let's see. Oh yeah, so that's the Rsa Public Key Cryptosystem. Oh, and that's Revest, Shamir, and Adelman, and if you've seen them in recent years, Ron doesn't have such bushy hair. And Adi still has a beard, though, I think, doesn't he? Yeah. We were young. So let me now briefly go to the what I call Diffie-Hellman-Merkle public key distribution. As I said, Whit and I called it alpha to the x1, x2. It's now called Diffie-Hellman key exchange, but as I pointed out, it's a Merkle public key distribution system, so I've argued if names should be applied to it, Merkle should be included. And so late one night in my study, in fact, at the same desk I still have, at my home on the Stanford campus, I was playing with the, what?
Sell it on eBay.
Oh. Whit said I should sell it on eBay. Actually, I have a better way of making money. At conferences like this, people like to have pictures taken with me, and at 50 cents each, I can support myself. Actually, my younger daughter in her younger days did things like that. She was quite, well, I won't go into that. She used to go up to Coit Tower or Twin Peaks, and tourists would pay for pictures with these San Francisco teenagers. So the basic equation, and again, there's a lot of playing around in what's public and what's secret. So each user creates a secret X. That's why it's X of I. So X Marty, X Whit, X Vint, and so on. And we then raise alpha, which is a public value that everyone knows, to the xi power mod q, and that is yi. That's an easy computation. That's a discrete exponential. Then, when we want to compute a key, kij, for users I and j to use, user I takes, user j takes i's public key, yi, raises it to the secret xj power that only he knows. That's alpha to the xi to the xj, right? Which is alpha to the xi times xj mod q. User I does the similar thing. He takes the public value for y, raises it to his secret power, and gets the same thing. It doesn't matter if you raise alpha to the xi and then to the xj or the other way around, it's commutative. And actually, yeah, I think rather than doing questions, given the difficulty of questions, I'll add this in. There's a very nice analogy that we did not come up with. I think maybe Len Adelman came up with it. You can help me here, Whit. It's the lock analogy. Do you remember who came up with that? Somebody else came up with it, and he's unsung hero number 7, and he doesn't even have a name associated to him, at least for today. If Vint and I want to exchange, actually, let's make it Audace again. And I want to exchange a secret message using lockboxes, but we haven't agreed on a combination. I can't just lock it up with a combination that we both know. That would be like a conventional crypto system. But I put my message in a lockbox, and I lock it with a combination lock that only I know. I hand it to Whit, who is a dastardly character, as you all know, and he would love to see what I'm saying, but he can't open it because he doesn't know the combination. He then hands it back to the next person and then to Audace. Audace, unfortunately, cannot open it either. But what does he do? He puts a second lock. We made the hasp big enough for a second lock. He puts a second lock on that only he knows the combination to. He then passes the doubly lock box up, and Whit is doubly frustrated because he can't take either lock off. When I get it, what do? I take off my lock, leaving only Audace's lock. I now pass the locked up box to Whit, who is still frustrated, even more so, because there's only one lock there. And when Audace gets it, he opens the box and takes out the message. Now notice, if we had not made the hasp big enough to put 2 locks on, then Audace could have done something different. He could have taken my strong box and put it in a bigger strong box that he locked up with his lock. But then when I got it, I couldn't get inside. It's no longer commutative. You have to take the locks off in a particular sequence if they go on in a particular sequence. Whereas the doubly locked box with the big hasp is commutative. And that's what's critical here, the commutative operation. So, Whit, do you remember who came up with the lockbox analogy? Anybody?
I don't remember knowing it or not knowing it. I didn't think. The first name I was associated with that kind of things was Gus Simmons.
Gus Simmons. Oh.
But I would all know that he was the first one to phrase
Yeah, Gus Simmons from Sandia is a possibility. So we have a multiple unsung hero.
I think Malcolm Williamson, in fact, at GCHQ.
Malcolm Williamson at GCHQ may have come up with that approach too. Oh, by the way, Dan Bona, who many of you know, my colleague at Stanford, Dan's father was visiting and told this lockbox analogy to Dan's, I think, roughly 10-year-old son. And the son said, but what, he used a postman as the middleman. He said, but what if the postman puts the second lock on and sends it back to me? I take off my lock, and then the postman who wants to read what I'm writing is able to open it. What did Dan's son just invent? The man in the middle attack. And there are ways around that, but that's something you need to deal with. So let me see what's next. Oh, so the interesting thing is I was trying to come up with a public key crypto system because that was the more, the better system, but I actually came up with a Merkle public key distribution system because this creates a random number that neither Audace nor I could predict ahead of time, but it doesn't allow us to exchange information without recourse to a conventional cryptographic system. So let's go to unsung hero number 4. First of all, who's unsung hero number 1? Ralph Merkle. Who's unsung hero number 2? John Gill. And Steve Pohlig is number 3. So Richard Schroeppel, and I have to thank Whit for introducing me to Rich. We're working on this area, and I think it was even before RSA came up that you mentioned that Rich had this new factoring algorithm. Basically, continued fractions, Morris and Brilhart 1970 paper, if I remember, had a way of roughly doubling the size of the numbers that could be factored. And what, compared to previous algorithms, what Rich came up with was a sieving technique that and he also did the analysis. That was the other thing that Rich did. No one knew how fast Morris and Brilhart's continued fractions factoring algorithm ran. Rich did admittedly a heuristic analysis, but it was a very reasonable one that showed that the runtime was e to the square root of 2 log n log log n for continued fractions, and he had a way to get it to e to the square root of log n log log n, getting rid of a factor of 2, which roughly doubles the size of the numbers you can factor by sieving. And Rich doesn't like to publish, and so he doesn't get as much credit as he deserves. But Pomerantz's quadratic sieve is really based on Rich's work, and Carl points this out very clearly in his, I think it's A Tale of Two Sieves is the title of the paper, and he says it was that Schroeppel's work was the inspiration, is his exact word, for the quadratic sieve. Oh, so when I get RSA, I've been corresponding with Ron Rivest at MIT. He sends me an early version of their MIT report, although early means a week before it came out. They were really in a rush to get it out. I think they must have been worried, especially with Pohlig, Hellman, that we're going to see this. And in it, he was suggesting 256-bit keys for RSA. And I wrote back and said, oh, you must not be aware of Rich Schroeppel's work, and they quickly changed it to 512 bits. Loren Kohnfelder is unsung hero number 5. How many of you have heard of him? Yeah. Oh, Whit has. I know you have. Yeah, raise your. Okay, Loren Kohnfelder was a bachelor's student at MIT, and he did a bachelor's thesis. Do you remember who he did it under, Whit?
No.
Oh, Len Adelman, I think.
Sorry? Okay, well, Konheim wrote that in something recently, and I questioned it.
Oh.
But if you think so, it's probably right. I haven't checked.
I may just be getting it from Konheim. So anyway, Loren Kohnfelder does a bachelor's thesis at MIT and invents digital certificates. So VeriSign and all the CAs owe their genesis to Loren Kohnfelder, who almost no one has heard of. What? Actually, I don't know. He's at Microsoft, Whit says. Where is he now? Okay, so I actually think I have a duplicate slide, yeah. So we have 12 minutes left, and I think rather than taking questions, because I was told it's hard in this audience, what I'm going to do is I quickly, just in the 3 minutes before my talk and learning that, I came up with some additional material that I hope will be of interest. And the bottom line is it's better to have friends than enemies. Now, if that needs proof, except how many of us really work at changing our enemies into friends? And this relates to cryptography. So let me go back to 1977. It's July 1977, and Whit and I are involved in a major fight with NSA over the data encryption standard, because we were saying the 56-bit key size was inadequate. And we also, there was a question of whether we were breaking the law by publishing our papers, because there is a law in the United States known as the International Traffic in Arms Regulations, ITAR for short, that's the initials. It's clear that exporting a jet fighter should be against the law unless you have an export license. We don't want companies just exporting them to anyone who has the money to buy them. So you need an export license. If you want to export the plans for building a jet fighter, you also need an export license. Well, it turns out these regulations define anything cryptographic as an implement of war. And by publishing our papers, we're in some sense exporting, in international journals, we are exporting plans for implements of war. And I think the penalty was something like 5 years in jail. And we had been vaguely aware that, we might run into some trouble. But a man named J.A. Meyer writes from his home address in Maryland to the IEEE, the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, which was publishing our papers, saying as a concerned IEEE member, he's concerned that the Institute is violating the law by publishing certain papers. But a very interesting thing happens when people start talking about cryptography. They talk in code. So he never said Diffie and Hellman, but he cites, I think, 6 or 7 IEEE publications by month and journal that he feels violate them, and we had papers in all but one. The IEEE, then speaking in code, writes back to him, and I'll explain in a minute how it's code, and says, we're well aware of these regulations, but it has always been our position that we, the Institute, are unable to act as the gatekeeper. It has to be the authors and their institutions who make sure that they're not breaking the law. Now comes the code. They send a copy to me, but it's not addressed to Martin Hellman, troublemaker. It's addressed to Martin Hellman as a member of the Board of Governors of the Information Theory Group of the IEEE, which was publishing most of these papers. They did not send it to all of the governors. So I get this letter, and I take it to John Schwartz, who is then Stanford's general counsel, because for 2 reasons. One, Stanford's potentially liable as the institution, but secondly, if I'm prosecuted, I want to know I've got the university's financial backing, because you can bankrupt yourself easily with a lawsuit. So I go to Schwartz, and he says, let me study it. A few days later, I come back, and I'll never forget this meeting. He says, it's my legal opinion that if the ITAR, if the regulations, are construed broadly enough to cover your work, they're unconstitutional, because it's freedom of speech, freedom of the press. But he says, I must warn you, that's just my legal opinion. The only way to decide this is in a court of law. If you're prosecuted, we will defend you. If you are convicted, we will appeal. But I have to warn you again, if all appeals are exhausted, we can't go to jail for you. And he also said, I had papers, Whit and I had published most of our things by this time, but I had 2 papers coming up in October. Remember, this is July 77. October 77 is the IEEE International Symposium on Information Theory at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York. I have a paper with Steve Pohlig, who you saw the picture of before, and Ralph Merkle, who you also saw a picture of before. And John I'd been planning to have the students go with me to the conference and deliver the papers, and so they would get more attention. And John said, I strongly recommend that you give the papers instead of the students, because A, there's a question of whether the university can expend funds to defend a student. I'm an agent of the university. I'm bringing in contract funds. But also, he said, from a practical point of view, I was a tenured professor. The students were just starting out in their academic or industrial careers. A multi-year court case could totally ruin a student, a new PhD like that. So I go to Ralph and Steve and I explain the situation. I say, I feel quite confident with the university's financial backing, but whichever you want to do is fine with me. The students very courageously said, no, we will give the papers anyway. But a week later, they come back, both of them, about the same time, and say, our parents are really concerned, and they're just beating on us. You give the paper. But we came up with a very good system. They still went to the conference, and it was time for the papers. Both of us went up. So Ralph and I, and then Steve and I went up. And I explained to the audience, who already knew what was going on, but I explained that on the advice of Stanford's general counsel, I would be giving the paper instead of the students, but that from every perspective except legally, I wanted them to consider the words I was saying as if they were coming from the student. And so the students stood there not saying anything, and they got more attention that way than they ever would have gotten if they'd given the paper. So I still haven't gotten to why it's better to have friends than enemies, so I'll jump to that. A year later, 1978, I get we determined, Whit has a wonderful intelligence network, and he determined that J.A. Meyer did work at NSA. It was kind of suspicious that his home address was in Maryland. And at the time, it seemed to us like this might be NSA shooting a warning shot across our bow. In retrospect, Meyer was probably a loose cannon, although there clearly were people within the agency who felt the way he felt, including at the highest levels. Because in 1978, 6 months or a year later, I get a telephone call from the director's office at NSA. The director at that point was Admiral Bobby Inman. And the voice on the other end says, Admiral Inman would like to, if it's okay with you, Admiral Inman would like to visit you when he's in California, I don't know, 2 weeks later. Would I be open? Well, Whit and I had been fighting this out with NSA in the press and never actually talking to NSA. We were dealing with Denny Branstad and somebody else at NBS, the Bureau of Standards, who had come over. Who's the other guy? Do you remember? Hogan. Oh. No, yeah, they came to the meeting, but Hogan and Branstad were still, Hogan and Levinson were still at the agency. I'm wondering, there was another guy at NBS who came from NSA. Okay. So we've been fighting this out, never directly, never talking, which is a bad way to have a disagreement. And so I jumped at the opportunity, and Admiral Inman came to my office a couple weeks later, and he has a good sense of humor. He looks over at me and says, nice to see that you don't have horns. And I looked back at him. I said, same here, because I had seen them as the devil incarnate also. He also told me that he was meeting with me against the advice of all the other senior people at the agency, probably because they saw me as the devil incarnate. And he said, but I don't see the harm in talking. That's something we should keep in mind today, not just in, well, first of all, in the cryptographic community, like the fight between the FBI and Apple, the Snowden revelations about what NSA has been doing. I think we need to rekindle that conversation. And I'm not the person to do it because I am not actively involved these days, but I encourage some of the younger people to start thinking that way and how to create bridges. And out of that very cautious initial meeting grew eventually a friendship. And as a sign of that, about 9 years ago, when I developed a risk analysis approach for looking at the question of nuclear deterrence and whether it was a safe strategy or not, I wanted to get some people with credentials in the national security community to sign a statement of support. Admiral Inman very quickly agreed to sign. Now, he wouldn't have agreed if he wouldn't have signed if he didn't agree with the statement, but he also wouldn't have signed if he didn't trust me. So it's better to have friends than enemies. So I think that's a good place to stop, and maybe we have time for a couple of questions. That material on the, starting with the DES controversy was all added quickly at the end. I hope it worked well. Andreas.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for this truly fascinating tour of the history of public key cryptosystems. I certainly learned a lot, and I guess almost everybody, except maybe for Whit, in the audience learned as much as well. Yes, we do have time for about 2 to 3 questions. We will hand out microphones to those who want to ask a question, and please, if you ask a question, keep it short. Vint, go ahead.
Okay, and I'll repeat the question if. Oh, great.
Wait. Hang on, I got to cycle my hearing aid so I can actually hear the answer.
No, he's not holding the mic next to him. He's turning off his hearing aid.
So the question is, after we run out of horsepower with the conventional kinds of cryptography, when quantum computing comes along, what's next as an alternative to the current factorization work factor?
That's why we have the, so everybody hear the question okay? So that's why we have the next generation here. You guys need to come up with some things. But I will add that separate from quantum computing gets all of the publicity. You know, what are we going to do post-quantum? I've argued, and I have a paper coming out in the CACM in December. It's a write-up of my Turing lecture in Vienna last October, in which I say, well, I think we're overlooking another important threat to public key cryptography as now practiced, which is another major advance in factoring algorithms or discrete logarithms, which tend to go together. And another advance there would devastate the existing systems because the number field sieve changed it from e to the square root of log n to e to the cubed root of log n. So you have to push the numbers out a lot further. And so now I'm a theoretician, so I can blithely throw things like this off. You working at Google will have to worry about how much it actually costs. But I've argued that we should have backup systems. Fortunately, post-quantum, and if there's another advance in factoring or discrete logarithms, the same systems that seem to work for post-quantum also would seem to work for dealing with this unforeseen advance in factoring. And so I've argued that we should build in, not wait until it happens, but build in right now a double security for both signatures and privacy that are running in parallel. And for example, in privacy, you XOR the keys together. So if either one's secure, your system is secure. Then if quantum computing suddenly takes a jump or there's suddenly a better factoring algorithm, we make use of key distribution centers, for example, which are not as good as public key cryptography, but better than nothing. And so you just continue running all along. Now, of course, that adds to cost. And I will add one other thing. The way I came to see the need for that is from my work on nuclear deterrence, which is a bit surprising. And I'll just make that very quick analogy. Many people point to the fact that we haven't had a world war in 72 years as proof that nuclear weapons preserve the peace. Well, wait a minute. A child born today has an expected lifetime of 80, 90 years. Is 72 years adequate evidence, especially if you want 95% confidence and can only project about 23 years into the future based on that evidence? And in the same way, there were 3 major advances in 1970, 1980, and 1990 in factoring, which also carried over to discrete logarithms, but there's been nothing in the intervening 27 years, leading many researchers to feel like we've hit a brick wall with factoring algorithms. But if you think of each decade as a coin toss, we got heads in the 70s, heads in the 80s, heads as advances in the 1990, and then we've gotten tails, tails, and probably a tails in this decade. But if you saw a coin show heads, 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 tails, 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 would you count on tails into the indefinite future? No. Is there time for one more question, or should we stop?
One more question, a short question.
Or a short answer.
And a short answer, yes. Would be appreciated.
Thank you very much. I've got a question concerning what you told about the problems you got when when publishing your papers, and I'm sure you somehow were concerned with these whole issues and affairs. My question is, did you I don't know, decide, did you think probably I shouldn't get into trouble, maybe I shouldn't leave everything and change my work, or something like that? And if so, where did you find courage to keep moving on?
Okay, first of all, everyone should come, not everyone, everyone interested in that question, because there's another parallel session that I know Vint is running that should be very interesting too. There's a workshop this afternoon at 4:30 on ethics in mathematics and computer science, where I will in fact talk about how I made that decision. But in terms of courage, there was no courage involved. I mean, it was just, Whit and I initially thought the 56-bit key size was just a mistake. So we sent, at least I did, and we sent a letter to NBS assuming they would fix the darn thing. And when they didn't, now you have a choice. Do you back down or do you continue? And especially being a kid from the Bronx and Whit's from Queens, we don't back.
Levinson was from Brooklyn.
And Arthur Levin. And the NSA guy was from Brooklyn, Whit just pointed out. So now my wife was very pleased when this made major news, because she said, now if something happens to you, there will be an investigation. But it didn't, I don't know, I wasn't worried during the Cuban Missile Crisis, which in hindsight was a major mistake. I thought my friends were all crazy to be worried that we would all be killed, and in hindsight, I was the one who was crazy. So we'll stop there.
Thank you again, Martin. It was great.